make sense. She's only been here a month. What's going on, right?
She has been trying to assimilate, though.
And I think that there's what happens at the barnmates, that's what we're talking about. There's another episode that I'm not going to spoil, but there's an interesting part where Peridot says something, and immediately after Amethyst says the same thing. So it sort of implies that Peridot has been looking to Amethyst in the way that she speaks and what she's doing. So I thought that was interesting. But I did notice that. Like, there's a moment where Peridot says a few things, I'm like, oh, that's happening. And it's interesting that I've never read Peridot as a person of color. No point there, just an observation.
Observation on maybe why. Peridot is very heavily coded as autistic, and our culture sees autistic people as white.
I mean, yeah, but I have autistic people in my family, so...
Not all autistic people are white.
You said society sees. You said society sees.
Yes,
You're
you
okay.
did. But what I was saying is that for me personally, I don't have that viewpoint because of that. And I actually never read Peridot as autistic, but I would be really interested to talk about that. I read Peridot as... I think the reason I didn't code Peridot or Jasper as people of color is I read them both as colonists. I read them both as conquerors. And that's not something I generally code as people of color, unless I'm reading an alternate history of some sort.
I guess at this point, since we're already opening up to the audience, let's just keep going. So yeah. I'll start just kind of remembering where hands are. So
to continue talking about Peridot, we were having the conversation earlier about Peridot and what was just talked about. I always read Peridot. There's the colonist thing, to be sure, but Peridot explicitly says at one point she's like 100 years old, as opposed to thousands of years old. So I always read her as the way like a single-digit age person would repeat something they hear on TV.
Oh,
and then certainly I'd like to read and talk more about the autistic coding, but that was also the way I read Peridot for a long time.
Oh, that's really interesting. I think I missed that part.
Yeah, especially
being that young.
Early episodes with the limb enhancements, and then she doesn't have those anymore, and she doesn't know how to deal with a lot of stuff, which could be autistic, but also I picked up on like the youth and their smartphones commentary. She's like, I got my screens.
I wonder how many apps she had on that finger. Hopefully her account is still linked to it, so when she gets new ones, she can still like load up her high scores on the games.
Any other comments from the panel? White shirt up front.
Sure. I appreciate class in Steven Universe as well. I think especially Greg embodies a character living kind of shiftily compared to any other character, especially a dad character that I've seen. Can you guys talk about how you guys feel about that? If you haven't.
I think it's interesting because one of the things I learned is it's been confirmed by the crew that Greg pays for everything for the gems and Steven. He's their source of money. And so the crew has confirmed that he pays for the house, he pays for their food.
Because you do wonder, because he has his own business and he does all these other things, so.
But it's interesting because you're right, he does live in this van, and it would be without, I don't know how that happened. When I heard the crew say that, I was like,
How much of that house does he pay for?
well, they built the house, but he pays for their food. Apparently, he pays for damages. He pays for that.
That's why he's living in the van.
There you go. That's why he's living in the van. All the money is going.
Even though only two of them eat, Steven and occasionally Amethyst.
But yeah, I think just the house. But
well, he did pay for the bar at the.
That's true. At the diner here. And I think it's really interesting because I don't think you see a father-son relationship like Greg and Steven on television much. Greg clearly loves his son, but knows that he's not where his son needs to be right now, that there are other things his son needs to learn, but he doesn't just shuffle him off. He doesn't send him off and end their relationship. He's still there all the time, and he's still connecting with Steven. And I think that's something that's really great. I am really anxious to see more, and I hope they give us more of like Greg's financial situation. Someone else suggested, it might have been AJ Universe, someone else suggested that he's not a good singer, but he's a good songwriter. So that perhaps he's been selling the songwriting credits to other people. Because I was like, that's actually true. I like the whole Van song, I just don't like his voice. So it's possible that he's been writing these songs and just sort of like selling them off. But I really do want them to explore his class and like his position in that city a little bit more. It almost feels like that city doesn't have, I mean, it obviously does because we see it, but it almost feels like they don't have a cash-based economy because of the way things are, with the way things work in that, you're just like, are you all just trading? Like, how is anyone earning money?
Well, it's
A couple things. Oh.
No, go ahead.
You want to go first? Okay.
Oh.
A couple things on that note. One, Beach City is shown to be a resort town, but so far we've seen it mainly in the off season. And I suppose the economy would change in that.
That's
It
true.
would be different from most towns under that system. And two, we've already seen, I mean, we finally saw a world map, and it could have been great with that giant hole where Russia used to be. So it's like, yeah, the difference is it's been confirmed that this is not just our world with something going on in secret. There have been really major changes. I think someone on the crew said that like World War II never happened, or it just that entire part of history just went completely differently, or just.
that makes sense.
LaShawn, did you have something?
Returning back to Greg and all that, I've always seen Greg more as kind of like a surfer dude-ish kind of guy who is actually more comfortable living out his van because, you know, he seemed to be someone that, you know, if he was a musician, he was just used to that, you know, kind of style life. And so, but yeah, I'm really to see his relationship. I just wanted to throw it out, so.
At some point, Greg says something to the effect of, "I just want to live with my son again," and it
Right,
implies
that one
that maybe at
episode.
some point, probably when Stephen was first formed,
Well, yeah.
he may have been living in the house, taking care of baby Stephen, and then at some point, he just decided to move to his van full time while the Crystal Gems took over his raising.
Well,
I think the extended intro, didn't that show Stephen first going to live with the Crystal Gems, like
yeah.
when he was already old enough to sing, at least, but
Yeah, the extended intro sort of implies that he's been living with Greg in the van, and that they build the house when Steven's prepared to move in because he can't live in the temple with them.
Okay.
Or at least that's the implication. I mean, it's only 3 minutes, so you can only read so much into it.
right.
But that's sort
Yeah,
of the
when we see that
implication
little
because he's like
montage.
sitting in the van playing a ukulele, and the house is just framed, and they're
Oh,
like,
okay.
oh, it's so hard, it's so much hard work to build a house. So there's an interesting thing there. Maybe he lived in the van with Steven. I mean, Steven was tiny. He didn't take up much room. Sleep in the glove compartment. It's fine.
There was a while back a hand in the farther back, and then I will have purple tie next, and I got you.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the gender stuff. So I haven't seen the most recent 2 episodes because I'm watching it on Google Play, and they just went live on Google Play today, so it's like, okay, now I have some more weeks today. But from the beginning, it's very clear that the gems are seems to me that the gems are supposed to be read as female, and then we've got some same-sex relationships going on. But then sort of halfway through the second season, where Google Play is fun enough, I started thinking about, well, as you said, they're aliens, and it was like, so when Jasper showed up, it's like, I read Jasper as much more ambiguous than all the other gems. So, can we really say that they're in a same-sex relationship if all the gems are going to be read the same way? We don't know how they deal with gender. Even though it's like really great to read it that way. That's what I want to do. But
This is true. I mean, I don't. Maybe I've missed something. Do we get any hints of like how romantic relationships work on the Gem Home world or anything like that?
I I'm not even sure there is such a
Yeah,
thing
that's
as
Yeah,
a
you're
cult
right.
world.
And
I think
That's part
the
of-
entire
that's part
notion
of
is
the
just
curse,
like
too.
revolutionary.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Lisha. Did you have something?
Oh, I was just thinking of how, yeah, with the, again, going back to the kindergarten, how gyms are created as opposed to, actually, even the way that they fuse.
Right.
Yeah, Garnet was such an anomaly because when they fused, they only all fused together if they were all one type.
Right.
So when Garnet was created, or when Garnet was made, that was two gems that loved each other deeply. So, okay, so something big is there.
Well,
So
yeah.
even by gem standards, it would be considered queer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I mean I think that raises a lot of questions about Pearl's interest in Rose, because it's clear that we sort of, at least I shouldn't speak for everyone, I read it as an unresolved romantic want, basically. Although I think it's implied. My own headcanon says that they were sleeping together, but it was casual and poly, and then Greg came along, because there is that scene where Pearl tells Greg there have been ones before you, there'll be ones after you, basically. Like, I'm the one who's constant, which really read as bad poly to me. I don't know if anyone else read that, but when that happened, I was like, oh, that was rude, Pearl. That was rude. Don't go to your partner's other partner and say that. That's not cute.
She was trying to drive him off.
Yeah.
She was jealous.
Yes. Yes, she was.
Oh yes, purple tie.
Fortunately, I wanted to talk about the gender stuff too, but my first statement is, just when I thought I couldn't love Steven Universe anymore, I found out that he too is a native Delawarean. So,
Love it.
but with the gender stuff, I was thinking, we have so many worlds, science fiction and fantasy worlds, where we almost are presented with all men, and mostly all white men, as the only gender to look at. And it's a really interesting choice on the writer's part to give us a world that is arbitrarily all women. And therefore, one of the things that I know from my wife's academic explorations, because she worked originally with women's communities, is that there's a thought of when you have women-only space, and I know all the problematics with that, yes, you have the opportunity to explore all the corners of gender. So, you have all these women in this women's space, and they're expressing a breadth of gender roles different from mainstream gender roles. So, was thinking about that and wondering if anybody had any thoughts along those lines.
I mean, I think it's really interesting that when Garnet splits up, Ruby and Sapphire sort of form these sort of stereotypical butch femme relationship, which I found very, very interesting, and I still don't know my thoughts on that yet, but it is, and I think that's one of the reasons that we read them as like a lesbian relationship, is because they break down into this very visible representation of like butch and femme. And I know how problematic that is, and I'm not coding them, I'm just saying that like the presentation-wise, they sort of pick up that. And so I think it's interesting that like the show has decided that they are going to give us this variety of gender representation. And I'm just going to stop there.
And then there's Stevani.
And
There's Stevani. Yes.
Oh my God.
Stevani. Oh gosh, Stevani. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it's like, okay, how do I explain that to my son? And at this point, it's like, I'm still trying to figure it out. But at this point, it's like, Steven is Steven, boy and girl, and that's how it is, and yeah.
I just love the joyous representation when that first happened.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it was just so much fun, and yeah. And Garnet's face.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God.
So happy. Yeah.
That was before we knew Garnet was a fusion.
That was.
That was
true.
That leads to Amethyst being my favorite. Where she's like, "Look at Garnet's face." She's like, "You just got garneted." I was like, yeah, I think that, like you said, I think it's really revolutionary that usually when we get a fantasy cartoon, we have the all men and maybe like one woman, and this is completely the opposite. And
But
you
I
have
have somebody on the internet complaining, "Where are the male gems?"
No, are you feeling underrepresented?
I ain't got time for
You
that.
mean aside from Steven?
I got one answer for that: block. But the other thing I was going to say is that I think it's interesting that they seem to be leading up to Steven becoming the leader of the Crystal Gems, especially if you, and it doesn't feel fucked up. Like, usually if you saw this group of like women training a young boy and then you're like, the young boy's going to take over. But it's clear that he's not taking over because he's a male. He's taking over because he's part human, and his empathy allows him to connect to all these people and bring them together. And that's what he embodies, is this sort of empathetic human, which we don't get in males who are like, whose power are their feelings.
Yeah.
Except for Mati, but he doesn't count.
There are several hands, well, a lot of hands that came up at that. Although I do have Pinky Skirt, and then way in the back have both been raising their hands a little bit longer.